Hi, I'm Janine Pointer, and I am with the Lynn Institute. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for our company, and we are so glad to have you watching today. If you've been watching our social media channels, you've noticed that we've had Dr. Chan Hellman talking with Steve Petty, our Executive President, and I, and giving us some really insightful information about how we cope during this time, how we develop hope, and actually learn hope in order to implement those strategies in our lives. And it's been so insightful. So I'm glad you're back, or if you're joining us for the first time, we invite you to go back a little bit in our social media channels, and you'll find those other at least two segments that we have in there. So we're ready to go today. And Dr. Hellman, so glad to have you back with us again. We appreciate it, and you have such wise words to share with us. One of the things that we want to talk about today, we see and even some of us are touched and work with companies that right now are having to furlough some of their workers or change the way they do business. There are pay cuts that may be happening in order to not have to furlough people. But the whole work environment, the whole company structure is in flux during this time for a great many companies. For those that are having to work remotely, that's another thing that we're doing. And for those who are having to make some of the cuts, or even the small business person who's facing a possible closure, how does hope come into all of this? What do we do with this situation when it comes to hope and putting it into this equation?
Sure. So I think it's important to answer that question initially by saying that when we're talking about hope, what we're really not referring to is really this power of positive thinking, that in this time of adversity, people need to just be positive, because there are times when we don't. There are times that we need to experience fear, frustration, aggravation. But it's the core components of hope, which is based upon goal setting, identifying pathways to those goals, and then generating and sustaining the willpower to pursue those goals. Now, from an employer's perspective, historically, what our research and others have found is that higher levels of hope among employees predicts higher levels of performance in the workplace. It also serves as a buffer to burnout and stress, and I think that's a little more germane to this time right now. Mm-hmm. But it also reduces turnover. So, the science of hope in the workplace is actually quite strong. For the way in which employers are being impacted, there are difficult decisions, and we have to start thinking about the types of goals that people set that drives hope. So in times of adversity like this, it may be that our goals are focused on avoiding some outcome. The alternative is to think about goals from an achievement standpoint. And it's those type of goals that really drive the pathways that we think. Some of the things that I think, as we're trying to be hope-centered in these frameworks, is, we can see a lot of organizations and businesses in our communities where they're reducing their operations, they're furloughing, but they're doing so in a way that is considering the employee, the human connection. It's not just we're going to get rid of you today. We're faced with this extreme adversity. And so making these actions in a way that is connected with people, that is caring for people, is the right way to nurture hope. And from an employee perspective, to feel like my organization cares about my well-being, is an important component of nurturing my hope, even though my organization is having to make significant, difficult decisions.
So in the midst of that, as how does an employer send that message of care and concern while making, what are some strategies for that?
Well, so clear communication is a great piece of that. So I think communicating the goal, and I think also this is a great time to really examine your core values, and letting those core values be a significant part of communicating. So if we're having to reduce operations, but I have to make these decisions in a way that I want to take care of my employees to the best of my ability, then I have to be able to communicate that. It's a hard decision, but if as an employee, I know that my employer is making these decisions while also thinking about me, while also communicating with me. And so the actions have to be, the pathways have to be directly connected to the goal and that value. And as long as that's shared and communicated, I believe employers are doing the best that they can.
Okay. Within that structure also, um, you talked last time about some creativity and some things that you're seeing that keep the connectiveness of people, but also probably cultivate hope as well. And do you see some of the adaptability of companies moving from doing one particular thing to totally changing what they do as a company, as hope inspiring and hope cultivating?
So I think there are specific actions that come to my mind that I've been watching. And one in particular, it started with a group of nurses at a hospital. And as they engage in that shift change, and certainly doing the hard frontline work for each of us, they start the conversation in what was referred to as a hope huddle, where they very intentionally start each shift of where have you seen hope? And again, it's not the power of positive thinking. It is these goals, pathways, and willpower. I strongly encourage all of us, but organizations in particular, to the hope heroes in their organizations. And these are individuals who are faced with a significant challenge due to this pandemic, but they're finding very creative solutions to still achieving the mission of the organization in new and creative ways. And I think these are our hope heroes, and organizations would do well to identify them and to give them significant visibility, because while they're a hope hero, they're also modeling hope for the rest of us. They're showing us that there are solutions to these barriers.
Great. Awesome. Steve, I think you had a couple.
Yeah. Thank you for being here with us again, Dr. Hellman. Greatly appreciate it. You've talked about in your book, sustaining hope. And with what we're going on right now, most of us have never seen anything this devastating in our lives and so all-encompassing of not only our nation, but our world. How can we talk to people about sustaining hope in their lives when some people, like Janine said, some people have been laid off? Your whole world has been turned upside down by how this is affecting all of us. How do you talk about sustaining hope when some people are concerned about, how am I going to pay the rent? How am I going to feed my children? What are your advice on that type of sustaining hope in these current times?
Yeah, so the first thing that comes to mind, Steve, is this idea of social connectedness. And we have to stay connected to people in our lives. And so one of the things that, while we've been talking a lot about individual level hope, what I'd like to do is just bring up this idea of collective hope. And, as we are, as each of our communities are responding to this pandemic, we need to start looking at this from a framework of we're all in this together. We are all, regardless of our social economic status or position, we are all experiencing this pandemic. Now, there may be differences in the resources that I have access to. So, you know, I certainly want to recognize that. But if we have this shared goal, this experience that we're having, then how do we begin to look at our communities as pathways to the goals that each of us set? So, you know, we certainly have a tremendous social service safety net. And so those resources are out there to help families in terms of getting food, paying bills. You know, evictions have been suspended, things along those. We will get through this. In the short term, it is very difficult, but there are pathways that are emerging. There are support networks that are emerging in our communities.
That's great. And when we talk about families, this again is affecting the entire family. Many people having to work from home now, kids are at home. So parents are trying to juggle not only their own work and then trying to help kids with school. How do you help with the fear that kids are seeing? This has totally shaken all of us, but the fear and the unknown and this total paradigm shift from the kids and children and students, their norm. What can we do to help them learn hope during this crisis and to try to keep them going forward? The resiliency that you talked about before, how do we do that and instill that in the children while we're at home with them?
Sure. So I think parts of that are, number one, don't ignore the problem. Don't ignore the situation that we're in. But at the same time, don't dwell on the situation. Now, this is an uncertain time. We don't know how long this is going to last. But I can, for instance, my granddaughter has been with us for the last 3 weeks because of just the social distancing. And so how do we help her navigate starting school back in a virtual framework? And for me, it is going ahead and breaking down the components of hope. So what we're going to do is we're going to set a goal for this week with regards to her school. And with that week, we're also going to set a daily schedule of, you know, when she gets up, these are the things we're going to do. We're going to spend this amount of time. So all I'm doing is creating those pathways and demonstrating for her the things that we're going to pursue, the things that we can control. And that is going to nurture that hope. Stay focused in the short term, build that social connectedness. I will say this, you know, as we're all home working in families and we're all home isolated, and we're recognizing that what was earlier a big house is suddenly a small house, right? And so I do think that we have to recognize that maybe everybody needs a place in that house that is theirs,
Right.
that they can just go to and do their work, or just to take that break, that survival window, that we all just need a moment to recharge in that. You know, families that have, I mean, I'm fortunate enough that I have a nice computer that is connected to the Wi-Fi, but I can imagine, for instance, if I had 3 children who had to navigate all of their schoolwork. I'm employed, my wife is employed, but we've got one device.
Right.
So how do we all get that work done? And what I would tell you is that on the surface, that seems big and overwhelming, but every problem has a solution. And if you just set the goal and start figuring out those pathways, the solution will emerge.
But like you said, it sounds like everything you're talking about for your granddaughter, for an example, you've set structure to where even though your lives have been kind of turned upside down, you're setting structure, you're setting goals for each part of the day, which is helping to instill that and sustaining the hope. Is that?
Absolutely, absolutely. One of the things that I've really enjoyed seeing in social media is, you know, we need to remind parents and families that, you know, I'm not a math teacher. I'm not a science teacher. I'm not a, you know, and so I don't have to have the solutions to all of those problems. but I can build a connectedness where my granddaughter and I are going at this in a socially connected way, to show that there are steps that we can take and to help mitigate that frustration piece.
Well, and in this time, if nothing else, this is a time where hope can really needs to be encouraged and implemented. And your book speaks so I can't say enough about it on what it's done for our family. And again, I've shared the book, and I feel like it's really the time for hope. If nothing else, this really has this world crisis and our crisis in our own families and dealing with this. Hope needs to be encouraged and implemented, like I said. And thank you for answering those questions, Dr. Hellman. I'll turn it back over to Janine. Thank you.
I have a question that goes along with what you've just been talking about. So we set structure, we set some goals, both with our children and our families. So do we integrate celebrating those wins, if you will? So when the goal is achieved, do we celebrate that? And is the word hope included in that, or is it that the celebrating of that achievement is the instilling of hope?
So I think it's both. I think celebrating the achievement is helping to increase that willpower, that mental energy, and showing us that we can achieve these goals, that these things are in our control. A goal achieved is nothing more than a pathway to the next goal that we have. But I would tell you this, just as you asked the question, this came to mind. When we set a goal for, let's say, for our family for this week, and we've identified the pathways or the strategies that we're going to pursue, I think that it is worth, in that early phase, setting down either by yourself or with your family, perhaps, and beginning to have discussions about what is it going to be like when we achieve this goal? How should we celebrate this together? Because all we're trying to do is create a future memory of success, right?
Okay.
That will help bring that collective hope to the forefront.
Okay, that makes total sense.
Yeah, definitely.
So some just questions about really what we can do in our homes. Are there some hope related movies that you particularly like? A lot of families are spending time with watching movies these days. Are there some that you might recommend that actually focus on hope and are good for the family to watch?
Yeah, so I think that thinking about movies, books, songs, all of these things model hope for each of us. And I guess what I would invite each of the listeners who are going to watch this is for them personally to answer that question. I'll answer it, but let me be first. The person listening is, what is your favorite movie about hope? And why that is so important is because you connect with that, you identify with it. And invariably, you are going to talk about the main character who overcame something difficult. Mm-hmm. And because you connect with that, it can help generate your own sort of sense of energy that you can achieve things. So for me, and I'll answer the question now, two movies that continue to come to mind for me personally is Good Will Hunting, which is, to me, a tremendous movie about hope almost in every scene. It's rated R, so maybe a little caution about some of the language associated with that. Shawshank is also just a phenomenal movie about overcoming extreme adversity. But those two movies, for me, resonate.
What about, are there movies that you feel like are good for your granddaughter watching? Even some of the animated, Finding Dory and that, that spirit of I'm going to reach this goal, kind of thing.
Yeah. So, I mean, certainly we could think about most of the Disney movies, for instance, Finding Nemo.
Nemo, yes.
That young person who is pursuing goals and has all of these significant relationships who are helping them ultimately achieve that goal. What I would encourage parents to do is to find those movies and to periodically take a break and start examining with your child, what are the goals of Nemo? What are the barriers? How did Nemo overcome that? And who were Nemo's significant friends that helped encourage him along the way? You can break down any movie in this context of hope.
Okay,
Great.
that sounds good. Well, thank you again. I want
Very
to
much.
remind everybody, Hope Rising. It's on Amazon.com. If you want to order it, I ordered a few more the other day and got them pretty quickly. It's a great read. Dr. Hellman goes into much, much greater detail on some of the premises that we've been talking about in these last 3 segments. And we hope to bring you more information from Dr. Hellman in the coming days. But until then, we thank you for joining us. We thank Dr. Hellman. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and insight as it relates to hope and how we can all come together to face this adversity with hope. So until next time, thank you so much on behalf of the Lynn Institute, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.